If we aspire to live a spiritual life, we must ask ourselves, what does it even mean to try and be spiritual? There is a popular saying nowadays that people use. They say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, as though they can attribute to themselves something positive about the term spiritual, but they see being religious as negative. And when questioned about what they mean by spiritual, very often people understand being spiritual as appreciating the beauty of nature and the bird calls, or having a sense of awe about creation, or enjoying a piece of music and so on. And these really are just feelings that are common to almost every person. But there's nothing spiritual about them. They require no effort, no struggle. They demand no commitment of us, no real response. In and of themselves, they may not be evil. Of course, they may lead to a kind of hedonism. But it is not being spiritual to have these feelings. St. Gregory the Great says, if we want to know what being spiritual is, we look at the teachings of Christ. And Christ turns the world's sense of everything upside down, but particularly what it means to be a spiritual man. St. Gregory the Great says to us, in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of St. Mark, Jesus is explicit about what is necessary. Jesus says to us, you must deny yourselves, take up your cross, and follow me. And at every stage, we see a direct conflict with what the world is telling us. First, Jesus says, deny yourself. We live in a world in the 21st century where education, advertising, art, even psychology tells us we must fulfill our desires, our whims, our impulses, if we're to be whole and fulfilled. In fact, some psychologists even try to tell us that if we deny these desires and impulses, it can be harmful to us. But Christ says the opposite. He says we must show restraint, discipline, overcome the old man of impulse and passion. There is no freedom. We are enslaved so long as we allow these feelings to dominate us. We must put the old man of sin to death if the inner man of freedom is to be alive. And Jesus says to us, you must take up your cross. Take up your cross. St. Gregory explains this in two ways. He says there is an outer and an inner component to this. Of course, we must take up our cross by denying and putting to death the old man of passions and impulse and bodily appetites. But harder it is to crucify the heart, to crucify the inner man. But unless we crucify ourselves inwardly, we will not overcome the outer passions. To crucify ourselves inwardly demands that we love and we forgive. It takes great humility to love and forgive even when someone is treating us badly. And finally, Jesus says, follow me. Follow me. Where does Christ go? He goes to Calvary. He goes to the cross. And we too must follow him. When we look at history, through the centuries, countless men have followed their kings into battle. What king would take into battle men that weren't willing to die for him? And our heavenly King too requires of us to be willing to lay down our lives as we go into battle with him. Possibly physically lay down our lives, but certainly spiritually, inwardly, give ourselves completely to him. If we cling to life, bodily life, and the life of this world, our hands may be so tightly gripped on the things of this world, we cannot lay hold of the heavenly kingdom. It is frightening to think of martyrdom, to suffer in this way for Christ. But we know that the cross, crucifixion, cannot be separated from resurrection. Without crucifixion, we cannot know resurrection into the kingdom of God. Everyone will be resurrected, but not everyone resurrected to the kingdom of God. But similarly, when we experience crucifixion, we must never lose sight of resurrection. The two always come together. The cross itself is prefigured again and again in the Old Testament. And in the 15th chapter of the book of Exodus, we read where the Israelites were being led through the wilderness of Shur, and the water was so bitter the Israelites couldn't drink it, and they complained, they moaned about Moses. Why has he brought us here? And when word of this got to Moses, he takes down a tree and plunges it into the water, and the water is made sweet by God. Of course, the tree symbolizes the cross, and the water is the bitterness of our lives. Unless we plunge, unless we allow the cross to enter our lives, we will not overcome the bitterness of this world. But the cross, the way of the cross, crucifixion, brings a sweetness, the sweetness of God, a sweetness that is eternal, that changes the nature of this world. Even crucifixion itself, our suffering itself, is changed, transformed. When we lay hold of resurrection, when we taste the sweetness of God, we know that God has turned the bitterness of this world, healed what the world is doing to us, and enabled us to enter into his kingdom.